Without education, we are in a horrible and deadly danger of taking educated people seriously. G.K. Chesterton. Good afternoon. This should be a short one, and I want to just double check to make sure everything is good. And yeah, all right. I should have done that earlier. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain what agnosticism isn't. That way you can understand what agnosticism is. It may be confusing. All right, so first of all, agnosticism isn't atheism, but we'll get to that right now here. Oh, not that. Oh, well, agnosticism isn't that. That's my NC. I clicked on the wrong thing. Okay. Here's a quick clip, 30 or 54 seconds of listening to John Quantum Eraser. I'm pretty sure you've listened to this before.
He's an atheist, but
I'm not an atheist.
Point of concept.
I already told you I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic. Do you understand the difference between an agnostic and an atheist?
That's a lack of knowledge. That's an argument from ignorance fallacy position.
Whoa. Tell me, what is an agnostic?
They don't have enough information to make the call.
No, that's not what an agnostic is. Here, why don't you Google it?
Yeah,
tell me the definition within Google results.
Knowledge, Gnostic means knowledge.
Hold on, John.
A means without knowledge.
Hold on. He's saying your definition of Gnostic doesn't meet his.
Agnostic.
So, yeah.
That's what I meant. Sorry, agnostic.
Yeah, gnosis means knowledge. Agnosis means without knowledge. There's not enough information to make the call. This is common knowledge.
That is not common knowledge. Why don't you Google it?
I don't have to Google it. I know what it is.
Okay, so now it's pretty comical. All right, I'm gonna play back Alan Watts' "How to Grow" a little bit snippet here. I should actually put that in notes, but description box. But all right, before I get to that, I want to say, all right, let's try to differentiate between what is ignorance, what is belief, what is gnosis, and what is agnosia, or agnostic. Being Gnostic, agnostic is quite different than what is a gnosis and agnosis, if there is such a thing as agnosis. So when you don't know when you can know, you can call that ignorance. I mean, there's the possibility of knowing, but you choose not to know. That can be, or not to acknowledge that it can't be known as being ignorant. Now, if you know what you cannot know, for example, we call the supreme reality, existence, God, the highest being, the creator, afterlife, these things for where we are now, we cannot know. And to say you know, that is a belief, because it cannot be shown. I mean, you can ask someone to show you, especially if they say, oh yeah, you want to know who God is? Well, here's this book. It's called the Holy Bible, and this is God. Or someone, you may ask, so what is this reality? And they'll go, oh, it's the Matrix. Here, have a look at this movie. And so you look at the movie, I don't think that's what this is. All right, so when you don't know how to explain what you know, I would call that gnosis. You know something, but it's a way where you know, and it's difficult for you to explain because that experience is custom fitted to how you would know what you know. And to explain it to others, it may be a little bit difficult, but it can be known. For example, I like to point out that when I look into something or experience something, I understand it. I may not be able to explain it very well or articulately, but then I can go looking for others who have had similar experiences, and I see or I notice them trying to explain it, and it's the same experience that I experienced, the same knowing that I know. And how did they get to that point? And I can see and I can find similar pathways to how that individual knew. Now, agnosis, actually, agnosia is the Greek term for it, the etymology of it, which means unknowing. And I like to apply it similarly to Neti, which is more of a Vedanta or Vedic, or is it more of a different type of yoga? I forget. Not yoga. Hindu. I forget the type. Sorry. But it's also from like apothetic theology. It's about knowing something from what it is not. Okay, it's not this, it's not this. So it's what you know when you cannot know, and you know it as something it is not. So, for example, what is the afterlife? Is it life? No, life is life. It's not the afterlife. Is it before you're born, before you're alive? No, that would be something like before life. It's a concept, and we can't understand a concept because we can't experience it. And if we do experience it, like some people say, hey, I experienced death. And then you go, well, you're still alive, so how do you know you died? They don't know how they died. They don't know. Well, they're still alive, so obviously they didn't die. Maybe they were just on the cusp of dying, or there might be a peculiar term for it. Well, I was officially dead within like for 5 minutes, and then I came back to life, and therefore, yeah, I'm not dead, I'm alive. And so, it's something you can't know, but you know what it isn't. So I definitely know that death isn't life, that God isn't a specific thing like this microphone. God is not this microphone. Could it be this microphone? I guess it could. It could be part of God. But for example, another example is just am I speaking out my thoughts, or are my thoughts formulating as I speak? Whatever. It's something I can't know, because I mean, if I am thinking exactly what I'm saying, is what I'm saying exactly what I'm thinking? But I can't think to know that. I mean, it can be complicated, but the it's more of a it's a concept of like, okay, just think of a concept. There's a concept out there, and we can't determine whether it's concrete or not, if it's material or something we can experience when we're conscious in this type of consciousness, in the current consciousness that we experience, you, me, everyone else. So if we can't experience it and someone says, hey, this is this, and we go, no, because we know what this is and it is not that. So try again. So they have to explain it again, try to formulate the concept into something concrete where everyone else can experience it. And if it cannot be done, or we know it can't be done at that time or a moment, whatever it is, then we just call it as agnosia. Or neti. We're agnostic about it. So people have a belief in, say, the Christian God, whether it's the Yahweh or Yeshua. Others may have different deities that they express as what God is, and well, it's more of a belief because it's not concrete. We cannot experience that. We can experience the concept of it, but we cannot experience the reality of it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, such as nature. We know nature exists. We can't explain the entirety of nature. It's what we experience, but it's nothing that we can grasp as a whole. It's just what we call nature. We're just outside. It is what it is. It's there, whether we imagine it not to be. It's still there. All right. So I'm gonna play back this snippet. It is about 11 minutes long, 11 minutes 5 seconds, and it's interesting to like I was saying before, to listen to someone and look back and notice that a lot of these things have been out there before we even looked at it. Like, I may have listened to Alan Watts as a teenager, or maybe in my 20s when I was just reading around different types of books on theology. I read the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, which is just part of, anyways, things like that. Like, I may not have, most of it was stories, didn't study it in depth, like taking words out and trying to piece it together. But I don't think we're ready for that. It's just like certain your children, they're not ready for certain things. When they're an adult, they may be ready. It's like when we're an adult, we can be ready for certain things that we may not have been ready as a child. So it's just it's just kind of the next step, you might say. All right, now let me shut up and play this back.
An understanding, a real feeling understanding of the polar relationship between the individual and the world is something that operates, as we say, in your bones, and isn't just a view that you hold or a belief that you hold. It's so curious that the emphasis of the Western tradition in religion is primarily upon right belief. Do you believe in the right dogmas and the right doctrines? And only secondarily upon right action. Because what you believe is, in Christianity at any rate, far more important than what you do. Because one is saved through faith, not by works. And early in its history, the Christian church rejected the movement in the church which had been known as Gnosticism, from the Greek gnosis, which means knowledge. And in a way, there were some sound reasons for doing so. Because the Gnostics were what I would call anti-materialists. They divided human beings into three classes that were called, respectively, pneumatic, psychic, and hylic. The last one being H-Y-L-I-C, from the Greek hyli, or they would call it now ili, meaning wood. So the people were spiritual, psychological, and wooden. And that is to say, the wooden people were those most absorbed in materiality and most closely identified with their bodies. And Orthodox Christianity rejected this sort of distinction because of the perfectly correct idea that material existence is not inconsistent with spirituality. This is something which most Christians have forgotten. But they do believe as the central principle of Christianity in what's called the incarnation. That in the Jesus of Nazareth, Almighty God did in fact become material, become human. And by this process initiated a transformation of the cosmos. In the words of Saint Athanasius, God became man that man might become God. And you don't hear that from the pulpit very often. The Christian Church therefore emphasized pistis, or faith, as against gnosis, or knowledge, because they said you can never know God. God could never become an object of knowledge. And in this funny roundabout way, the Christian theologians were saying exactly the same thing as the Hindus. Only the Hindus do call this knowledge of God through faith, they call it jnana, which is the same as the Greek word gnosis. But just to give you a little sidelight on how words get mixed up in their meanings, we now have a class of person called an agnostic. And an agnostic generally means a person who doesn't commit himself to any beliefs about the ultimate nature of things. He just says he doesn't know. But the original word, agnosia in Greek, meant a special kind of knowledge. It was called the dark knowledge of God. The knowledge of God in the cloud of unknowing, to use the title of a mystical treatise written by an anonymous 14th century English monk. This monk derived his ideas from a very mysterious figure who wrote under the name of Dionysius the Areopagite. Dionysius was a 5th or 6th century Syrian monk who had learned his mysticism from Porphyry, who got it from Plotinus, who was a Neoplatonist, and who probably got a great deal of stimulation from the intellectual world of Alexandria. And Alexandria, in the early years of the Christian era, was a tremendous exchange place between East and West. Buddhist monks visited Alexandria. It was one of the great centers of trade between Rome and India. And as you may know, all Rome's gold eventually went to India for the purchase of pepper. And as a result of this, the Roman economy collapsed. They bought too much luxury from India. India, in exchange, got Roman architecture. And you'll see a lot of Roman architecture in Indian temples. But Alexandria was the great center for the Gnostics and for Christian theology. And some of the greatest theologians, Clement, Origen, Athanasius, Saint Cyril, all worked out of Alexandria. Well, now going back to this strange monk, Dionysius, it was he who first put around the idea in Christian circles that there was such a thing of the knowledge as the knowledge of God by faith, by agnosia, really, by unknowing. And he, in a book which he wrote, very short book called the Theologia Mystica, he wrote a treatise on the higher knowledge of God, which might be quoted directly from the Upanishads in certain parts of it. The last section of it reads like the Mandukya Upanishad, because it's a series of negations. It says what God is not. And he goes very far, because he says that God is not one. He says our idea of unity falls far short of what God is. So does our idea of Trinity. So does our idea of spirit, our idea of mind, of justice, of love. All these things are not really God. And he says in another place, if anybody, having seen God, understood what he had seen, what he would have seen would not have been God, but some creature of God, less than God, some sort of angel or something like that. It's perfectly amazing to consider the influence that this man had. For writing under the name of Dionysius the Areopagite, he became identified, you see, with St. Paul's first convert in Athens. And legend has it that he was the first bishop of Athens and was martyred in Gaul, where he's known as St. Denis. But St. Thomas Aquinas looked upon the writings of Dionysius the Areopagite as having the highest authority. And you could, if all the texts of Dionysius's work had been lost, you could restore most of it from quotations in St. Thomas. He wrote really two very important books. One was the one I said, the Theologia Mystica. The other was called the Divine Names. And these two books presented the two phases of his theology. The book called The Divine Names was a discussion on the nature of God in terms of what God is like, by analogy. And this kind of knowledge of God he called kataphatic, from the Greek pheme, to speak or say, kata, meaning to say according to, that is to say, to speak by analogy. Where he used, though, entirely negative language about God, this sort of discourse was called apophatic. And the word apo meaning away from, to talk away from. Just as a sculptor, when he makes an image, reveals the image by removing stone. And so Dionysius explained that one attains the knowledge of God by discarding concepts, which is exactly what the Hindus mean when they say, of God one can only say, Neti, Neti, not this, not this, not any conception. So thus in Hindu philosophy, the highest state of consciousness in samadhi is called nirvikalpa samadhi, which means literally non-conceptual. Vikalpa means a concept. Nir.
Okay, so that was that portion. Feel free to listen to that again. It's pretty good. He gave a lot of speeches. That resonated. It reminds me of what does it remind me of? I guess it reminds me of playing poker, Texas Hold'em. I like to play Texas Hold'em. And there are many times where, and people get amazed. They go, like, how could you call that? For example, I was leaving. It was like my last hand. I go, yeah, this is my last hand. You know, I'm going after this, and I'm still in. Someone else raises pre-flop, so I call. I have like I think it was King Jack. It's just not a good hand. I called anyways. You know, on the flop, there's a queen, there's a 8, and there's a 3. You know, it's just something not good for my hand. The guy bets, I call. I check, the guy checks, and then I check again, the guy pretty much goes all in. And I'm just thinking, this guy doesn't have it. Like, I can't see the other person's cards. I have no idea what that person has. I can't know what card he has. And obviously, I know what hand I have, and I've got nothing. I've got a king high. But everything that I experienced as far as observing the person I was going against, of analyzing the plays that were made with the bets, I just had a feeling that this person didn't have a better hand than I did, even though I didn't have anything, really, a king high. And so I called, and he had something like a very weak hand. It was like a 7-4 or something. He didn't have a pair, which I was surprised, right? But why did I make that call if I didn't know? It's like a gut feeling, right? It's a hunch. It's something that it's a lot of analysis that went on, but I went for it. And that's what I feel like is this. I mean, that's a difference within a belief. It's like a belief is like, I'm gonna win this hand. I'm gonna go all in before I'm gonna go all in. I'm gonna win. I just believe it, and I'm not gonna even look at my hand. That's what you might call a belief. Gnosis is kind of knowing. It's like, you've got your hand, you've got a royal flush. You know, no hand could beat it. You've got the best hand, so you're gonna win. You know, you don't have to know what the other person has. Now, being agnostic is, you don't know what's in the other hand. You can't see it. You can't fathom it. You have to go by analogies or other signs, signals, whatever it is, and you don't know. You just don't know. But in a way, you kind of do. All right? You kind of know because of other factors, which which kind of contributes to that. It's like what you might call, it's not like direct evidence, but it's circumstantial evidence, and it adds up, and you go, all right. It's not even like a chance. It's not like you can calculate, these are the odds that, I mean, you can calculate odds of what's bet, but these are the chances that he's got a better hand than me. When you got like a king high, the odds that someone's got a better hand than you is quite high, right? I mean, he has an ace. That's usually good enough to go all in. You know, ace high. No one calls like king high. And I do this quite often in poker. And people in poker, on the poker table, once I play a few hands, usually the good ones know that they can't really bluff me, so they don't really bet into it, and I usually know what I have against them. And just trying to know that for them to think they know that I know what they have is kind of funny in a way, but it works in my favor no matter what. And it's I wouldn't just call it psychology, because it's not. It's because I could look at the person, and I could look at their eyes, I could look at their mannerisms. If, some of them are really good at hiding what they have, but it's a combination of what they see, of what they think that I have, of how I may react, what I may be thinking, and what I might have. And if they're wondering, and that's part of it, if I observe them trying to figure out what I may have, then I have a figure they don't know what I have. So most likely, if they're pushing strong, they're bluffing. It's not set in stone. It's not that I know what they have. I don't. But I have a good idea what what it may not be. It may not be willing hand. So it's see, it's hard to explain. That's why I titled this as what agnosticism isn't. I don't know exactly what agnosticism is because it's trying to know what is unknowable. Therefore, it is not knowing. But just because you don't know, well, first, you don't need to pretend that you do know what you don't know, because that's just belief. That's just faking it. But knowing that you don't know, and therefore knowing most likely what it might be, and you have to make a decision. You have to act on it. And when you act on it, you just attain more knowledge to know what it could be. Just like when Alan Watts talks about the same thing that, which is funny, Bruce Lee talks about, where when you're sculpting something out of clay, you don't add more clay to it to get the essence of what it is. You take away the clay. And that's how a sculptor sculpts an object. They strip away of what is unessential to what it is that they formulate. Okay, so I hope people have a better understanding, knowing that agnosticism isn't atheism. Agnosticism is a form of Gnosticism in actuality, but it's different. It's not exactly the same. I mean, that's why it would just be called Gnosticism. It's agnosticism. I hope this helps, because the more I try to explain it, the harder it is for me to understand what I'm trying to explain. Okay, I'll see everyone later.